Welcome to our training. We're delighted to have you with us today. We really appreciate coming. This is the week 2 of the Building Your Circle with David Wetherow as our primary presenter. We appreciate you coming on time and being with us and sharing with us. Today we're going to be in really the second part of how you can accomplish creating a circle support or building or strengthening your circle support, over the 4 weeks that we're going to be doing this session. So while we're just getting started, let me encourage you to put into the chat box, if you would, just anything about a comment about how the homework went from last week, which was inviting one person to be part of your circle support, asking somebody, inviting them to the actual meeting, or just talking to somebody about what you're doing. David last week also talked about the idea of inviting somebody that you want to today's training, or showing them the recording, and we sent out the recording to everybody, so everybody would have that already probably on Monday or Tuesday. So with that, let's begin. We want to welcome you to Building Your Circle Support. Just a few little housekeeping issues before we begin with David. One is the view up in the top. By now, you're all Zoom experts, but for anybody who's new to this, just there's a toggle button that can pull you through, and some people like different views. The chat box down at the bottom, you can ask questions as we go along. I've asked people to put in there anything else that people might have to say, and I'm just looking at Dina here. I spoke extensively with someone who also works in the field, and what she thought was awesome. She's uninterested in joining us, but they thought the idea was awesome. Janet Tibbs is my sister, and helping. So if anybody else wants to put in the chat box, that'd be great. And also questions as you go along, feel free to do that. The Spanish translation and closed captioning. The closed captioning is down at the bottom. It's actually live transcript CC. Anybody needs that, that's a toggle button. And also just you can see how it works, and we're trying to model behavior. So we encourage you to use that in any of the platforms that you're working with, people you're working with. We have live translation with Sans de Boy, who is actually in Ecuador with us. And to do that, you have to click on the interpretation button that's down at the bottom. Some of your screen, depending on what you're using, you'll have to hit more, where it will say the live interpretation, and then you can hit the button for the Spanish translation or come back. We're asking everybody to be full screen on camera. This is from our first week. It just helps us to get to know people, learn people, and be more connected to people. This is particularly crucial in the breakout rooms that we're doing. We're going to have people share one-on-ones, two-on-ones pairing, and we really need people to participate. The training sponsored by the Nebraska Council on Developmental Disabilities and Nebraska DHHS, and we've been renewed for another year. At the end of this, we'll do an evaluation survey. We're really asking you, we'll give you that link at the end to fill this out. We're just at the end of our quarterly project report that we have to submit, and the council really likes to hear from you of how the session's going and the comments that we collect there. Here's our training team today. Will be David Wetherow will be presently our key presenter. We also have Ann Formeller and Mary Angus and Jennifer James as co-host and the back moderators in the background. So with that, David, we're going to turn it over to you, and we'll hear from David. David, you're on.
All right, thank you, Mark. So welcome to the second round of conversation about the STAR raft, a method for building great support circles. Last week, we talked about gathering your circle, and this week we're going to be talking about setting a good direction. Once you've got 1 or 2 or 3 people on side with you, one of the things that you can do is have some deep conversations about where you want to be going in your own life, or where the person that you support wants to be going in their lives. And again, years ago, when we were doing some work with the Nisga'a people in the far north of British Columbia, they told us to start any important event by honoring our teachers. And today's teachers for me over the years have been Marcia Forrest and Jack Pierpoint, John O'Brien, who created the PATH planning process, Beth Mount, who created personal futures planning, Michael Small, creating essential lifestyle planning, and reminded us to keep a balance between what's important to a person and what's important for a person. Our friends Nick and Joanne and David. Joanne was an entry-level direct support worker who taught me one of the most powerful lessons about moving forward with a person's interests that I've ever experienced. And the Niska people themselves, who have an ages-old pattern for identifying and putting into action the roles and gifts and contributions of every single person in their community. Also, a biologist named Margaret Wheatley, who started to visit our field a number of years ago and said she made an observation because many of the people that we were supporting or who've been supported in disability and aging and other fields are quite isolated. She said, nothing living lives alone. The starfish in the middle of this thing depends for its life on all of these other creatures, little plants and animals, but they also depend on the starfish for their well-being and for their sustenance. So it's a balanced environment. And she said, sometimes the real disability lies in a culture that doesn't know that we need each other. And so when someone or something is failing to thrive, it's time to strengthen connections. It's time to be on purpose about strengthening connections. And that's a little bit different of an action orientation than it's time to learn how to fold towels or balance your checkbook. Sometimes it really is time to strengthen connections. Margaret also recognized that as she visited several person-centered planning kinds of events, that people will truly support what they help to create. If we bring our beloved family members, our friends, people who have had our back for some time into our person-centered planning session, and they help to not only listen and appreciate what's going on, but pitch in during the session itself, they will stick with you over time, and they'll start to do things that are in support of so people help support what they help to create. And she said, it looks like what you folks are doing is building tools for thinking together and creating together and staying together over time. And of course, she was right. They're tools that help us focus our collective energy. I have a good friend who was asked by a person who she supported to organize her circle. She said, I got a lot of friends, but it's not organized. They're not talking to each other. Can you bring the circle together for me? And my friend did exactly that over time. All of this is focused when we're having these conversations on the very, very commonly shared idea of what a good life is. And this is just one way of representing that. A good life is a life of purpose, a life that's rich in relationships, that balances autonomy and interdependence for all of us, belonging and membership. Dave Petoniak says people are hardwired for belonging. And if we don't have that, we go a little bit haywire. Having valued social roles, knowing that what we do, what we contribute is valued in the community, as well as health and well-being and safety and security, the ability to make meaningful contributions, to have meaningful employment, to set our own course. There's a bit more to this. It's a more complex pattern, but we wanted to share this idea that a good life is something that all of us desire. And when we're helping somebody think about what their great life could be, keep in mind these ideas, because very often people have had very little experience in thinking about this, very little support to think about this, and tend to be thinking in terms of the next service. The star raft direction, and ideally the direction of every single person-centered planning enterprise, always starts with a person's indication of direction. And we have permission from Joe and his niece, Jane, to tell his story. We met Joe years and years ago in one of the southeastern United States. Joe is no longer with us. He passed on, but we still have permission to share his story. My wife and I were doing a training in the PATH, person-centered planning process. During that training, one of the things that happens is that 3 people get together in little groups, and they help each other one after another to do their person-centered plan. And there were 30 people in the room. There were actually 31, and Joe hadn't gotten to be part of one of the groups, and he came up to us because we were sort of, floating and helping the groups, and he whispered to us, "I want to get my path done." And so he brought together myself and Faye, that's my wife, and Jane, his niece, who lives in the small community that he lives in, and our friend Steve, who was part of the ARC of that state at that time. And he wanted to do his path. And usually a path starts with a big piece of paper with a big circle and a North Star and an arrow and some columns and things like that. But we knew that this was so tender that we needed to just start with a blank sheet of paper, both on the wall and in our hearts, and just listen to Joe about how he wanted to move forward with his life. And what he told us was that he wanted to go to heaven. He's a man of very deep faith. He's a very quiet person, but a man of very deep faith. And he wanted to be, as he described it in the upper right-hand corner of this, I want to be reunited with the people I love after a century of ills. That was Joe's phrasing. And he instructed me what he wanted me to draw on his path. He said, put a rainbow, because that's the promise that we all have. Draw something about the cave with the stone rolled away. I want you to put 3 crosses up there, because there were 3 crosses on the hill. A couple of angels. And then Joe walked up and he actually took the red magic marker out of my hand, and he wrote in Jesus, Jesus, because he knows that Jesus is up there in his understanding. And then he told me to do a drawing of the city of God, the city of gold, and the pearly gates, and Joe being welcomed into the pearly gates when he passes on. And so we did that. And then Joe said, okay, that's my hope. That's my dream. And then we got a chance to ask Joe to help us think about and understand how he thinks about getting there. And he says, I'm reading and praying on my way to ordination in the little church, this Church of God that I attend in my community. And it's literally a tiny church in a log building in his community called the Church of God. And he's reading and praying on his way to ordination. And he's testifying. And he said, I testify and I sit with people who are sick or dying. And I'll, when I know that that's happening, people invite me to their homes, and I will sit and pray and stay with them while they're going through what they're going through. And he said, I'm also watching Billy Graham on television. He has a strong message. And the pastor of our church is also somebody who's been teaching me. So that's how I'm working my way toward this. And he said, I have a quiet message. one of the things that was interesting about this particular church, this congregation, is that you didn't have to go to 8 years of divinity school to become ordained. The ordination came, out of the community asking you to take that role. What happened next was something very remarkable. Jane turned to us and she said, "Thank you for giving me back my Uncle Joe." She said, I love him. I've been on side with him for a long time. I didn't know how to help him, but now I know how to help him. He's just told us how we can help him, because I can help him strengthen his connection with all of these people. I can help him. I can announce to other people what his goal is, what his dream is, but also the contribution that he wants to make in his community. And then another remarkable thing happened. People in the bigger room, we were in a small room because Joe's very quiet and we needed to hear what he was saying. The people in the bigger room started to finish their work and they drifted in to the room where we were, and they met Joe and Jane and they saw what he had created. And there was this moment of warmth and affection and celebration and appreciation. And I love this picture because it has always occurred to me that when we're doing what we call person-centered planning, if we can get to a point that looks like this and that feels like this, it means that somehow or another we're on the right track and we're helping the person be on the right track. Now, this was really interesting because this person-centered plan, which was truly person-centered because Joe, as the person at the center, defined every part of it, didn't include considerations of, where you're going to live, where you're going to work, health considerations and things like that. This is where Joe wanted to start. And I think it was 7 or 8 months later, we came back to the same state to do another round of this kind of planning. And Joe showed up in a 3-piece suit, and he collected these 4 wonderful women to do his next path. He said, "I did my heavenly path. Now I want to do my earthly path." And they got together with him, and he described what his earthly path he wanted to look like. And this is what they drew: Joe's neighborhood. He said, there's a grocery store all the time. I want to work there. So whoever was holding the magic markers drew that at the time. Joe said, "I want to stay connected with my church, but I also want to be more connected with my neighbors, and have times when we can play together and eat together and celebrate together. By the way, I want a garden. I've got a little house or the house that I live in has a little patch of land that I'd love to turn into a garden." And it looks to me in this picture like he was getting very specific and giving very specific instructions to people about the things that he wanted on his path. Because I'm looking at this and I see a cat and a curly-tailed pig and some deer out in the woods, and what's probably a rabbit and maybe a squirrel. The rainbow is still there. That's still a big part of his world and his understanding and his direction. The Smoky Mountains, kids playing basketball, and him coaching basketball. He's kind of a good shot on a basketball court. And he described one of these elements after another. And again, Jane said, "I know how to help with this. I know these people, and I know how to make that introduction, and I know how to bring more and more of this into life for Joe, and to bring more people into helping Joe accomplish these things that he wants to accomplish in his life." When gathering the circle for these kinds of conversations. Remember that diversity works. The more diverse the group is in terms of age and where people have standing and what their history is like with the person, maybe a different kind of language or culture or ethnicity or different viewpoints or experience, the more really interesting and ideas and the more possibilities open up, because people can say, you know, you've just said that that you love poetry. I'm part of a poetry group that meets every second Friday. And, you know, you and I can go together, and these folks would love to see you coming. They'd love to have you there because I've read some of what what you've been writing, etc. If all these people are missing, those opportunities don't show up. So bringing your circle members into your person-centered planning process, or into the person-centered planning process for somebody who you care about, you know, a son or a daughter, you know, maybe your mom or your dad, maybe someone who you support as a service coordinator or direct service worker or a mentor, helping the person invite circle members into their person-centered planning process really makes a difference. Joe was a good communicator. He's probably the quietest person I've ever listened to, but sometimes communication is a real challenge. There are people who don't talk or can't talk. There are people who use communication devices and may take a long time to kind of assemble and think about what they want to say. So when communication is a challenge, our understanding is that the key lies in the circle, this creative assembly of people who know you and love you and have been listening to you for some time. And a lot of the time, the listening is a matter of watching when your eyes light up, of seeing what your attention is drawn to, but also seeing what works for you, the times of happiness and comfort, and what doesn't work for you. And what doesn't work for you can be transformed into saying, part of the hope is that I'm not going to get yelled at all the time anymore, that people will be speaking with me in a gentle way, still providing me with direction and support, but doing it in a gentle way. So you might do some work ahead of time, so the person has some time to think about and prepare their communication, and the circle has some time how they're going to approach the session. I think I mentioned last week that we had the privilege of living with an adoptive daughter for a number of years who was not a speaking person. Every once in a while, she would use a letter board if she had something to say that was that she wanted to be very specific about, that she wanted us to understand very specifically. But a lot of our communication was, was talking back and forth, sort of 20 questions, smiles, eyes lighting up, face going down, these kinds of things. So sometimes you want to invite people who've been listening to you for some time to remember and to relay what you have been telling them for some time. And by the way, the other time that communication can be a challenge is when someone has had a lifetime of experiences that bring them to the point of violence, where their communications are very challenging behaviors. We call them challenging behaviors, or self-destructive behaviors, or violent behaviors. That's when communication is a challenge. And you need to do a lot of really quiet, careful, gentle work ahead of time to understand and to give the person a chance to express the positive aspects of life that they want to be getting on with, the things that will help them become feeling more safe, more engaged, and so on. So doing that work ahead of time, and if you're a service coordinator or a person-centered planner, helping the person and the people who surround them do some of that work ahead of time. I've been in circumstances where, admission and discharge clinics where somebody gets dropped into the middle of 13 strangers, all with clipboards, who are planning, planning, and sometimes rightfully so, clinical solutions, clinical approaches. But that's a pretty nervous making event. If you put yourself in that person's shoes and think what that would be like, and that you don't know the people, that you're feeling pretty scared to begin with, you might end up communicating some pretty tough ways. It's really helpful to remember that what we are talking about, this conversation of setting a good direction, is not an individual education plan or an individual service plan or an individual program plan. It's an expression of the person's largest hope and an expression of their friends and family and carers' largest hope. But the interesting thing is that you can always derive an individual education plan or program plan or service plan that now reflects and honors and supports that vision. So I drew a little thing at the bottom of the service people saying, okay, we get that. We can help by doing this. And in many, many cases, having a person from the service system whom they trust, whom they already know and trust, in this planning conversation, changes their perspective, changes the service person's perspective on what's possible, because they know that what's possible is not just something that has to be delivered by the service system. It's something that is being delivered in collaboration with these other people. Judith Snow reminds us from time to time to look inside the dream. Sometimes somebody is going to say something that sounds just way out of bounds, that sounds impossible or unrealistic or outrageous. And she says it's really helpful when you're hearing something like that to do what she calls looking inside the dream. When she was 7 years old, she had a conversation with her dad around two elements, two things. Remember, Judith was stuck from the voice box down, or from just below her voice box. She had a tiny bit of movement in one thumb, but all the rest of her body was just very, very still. She changed and bathed and things like that. She said to her dad two things. One was, "Why do you keep me alive?" And he thought about it for about a microsecond. Then he said, "Judith, because I think you have a gift. And we need time to find out what that gift is. And you need time to find out what that gift is." And the other thing that she said to him was, "Dad, I want to become a long distance truck driver." She's 7 years old. I want to drive one of the big trucks. And she kept saying that to people. And people would say, "Judith, that's cute, but it's kind of ridiculous. You can't climb into the cab. And your arms don't work, so you can't shift, and your feet don't work, so you can't, use the pedals, and you'd starve to death, and so on. That can't happen. Let's talk about some other skill building." And by the way, when Judith was talking about this, I wasn't doing graphics when she was talking about this, but I did this afterwards. So I did this little picture of what people imagine she's talking about and what she was imagining when she said that to her father. Judith Snow Enterprises, the truck, probably 6 or 18 wheels. But she said when she became an adult and became one of the great teachers in our field, that she was doing everything that her 7-year-old self wanted to be doing, that led her to say, "I want to be doing long distance truck driving." What she really wanted was to travel and to have the ability to declare where she was going to be going. and a rhythm of life where she'd be working really hard for periods of time, and then, stepping back for periods because that's what her body needed. But mostly she wanted to be bringing good things to life for people all over the country, which is how she spent the rest of her life. I remember doing a path with someone who could not envision any kind of a future for himself. He was a very depressed person. But we asked the people in the room, when does he come alive? When does he sort of lift out of that? And they said, when he's helping somebody else, when his neighbor fell down and he actually called 911 and brought an ambulance and things like that. Well, you can go with that and find the places in the community where that kind of instinct to be helpful could really take root. Somebody else might say, I want to be a doctor. And we take that seriously enough to do a little drawing of a doctor in the thing that they wear on their head when they need more light. But then we say, what is it about that that is important to you, that appeals to you? Well, he's wearing a white coat. She's respected. She's helping people. She's helping relieve people of their pain. And there are lots of ways that someone can do that. I want to work in a healthcare setting. And again, Ruthie Beckwith does some wonderful examples of people who have been supported to do just those things in the form of customized employment, where, getting through 8 or 16 years of medical school isn't probably a real good prospect. By the way, you're seeing a lot of graphics, and I just wanted to say about why we draw things as well as writing things down. One of the people who we served, 35, 40 years ago, lived in an institution since the time he was little. And he talked about being in plan after plan after plan where he could not see what people were writing down. And usually when people wrote stuff down, meant that he was going to experience something that he didn't want to be experiencing, because he was being corrected all the time. And he said, I write my story with my life. And when we're listening to someone and there's somebody in the room who can capture those words and those ideas in both words and images, because some of us don't read, he knows or she knows that what she is saying is being heard and is being accurately reflected and accurately recorded. So it's a sign of deep remembering together what was said, what was discovered, what was committed to. And it's a signal that something really different is happening than the usual admission or discharge clinic. Marcia says it engages the right side of our brains, and it invites us and the person to create a picture that we can step into. And Faye says that people who don't speak or read can hold the circle accountable. And she says translation, and this is her picture of somebody pointing to the path and saying, where is my house? That hasn't happened yet. Let's get back on track around this. So the graphics can help, but the other thing that they can help do is clarify what somebody means when they say something that's really important but really abstract. I'll make this a longer story, a shorter story, but it was a situation where we were doing a path in a school situation where people had been at odds with each other for a very long time. And there'd been a lot of conflict between the family and the teachers and the principal and the school board. And there were 20 recorded meetings, and lawsuits were in the air, and teachers aides and the kids were all caught in the crossfire. And we started this path not with a plan for the kids, but with a plan for the conversation about how do we need to work together, to collaborate together, so that this is working for the children, but also working in terms that the school can accommodate. And so we asked the question, what do we need to create in our environment and in the way we behave toward one another so that this is working. And it finally became the principal's turn to say something. And he said, we need trust. And I wrote that down. And he was about, things were about to move on, but I was able to turn to him as the person who was doing the graphics and saying, John, when you said that, and when you think about that, you may have an image or sort of vision, video in your mind about what you mean by that. Tell us more about what you mean by that. And he thought about that for a minute, and he said, back in the day, back in the 70s, when people were doing encounter groups and things like that, we all learned a trust exercise where you would stand, on the floor, and three people are standing behind you, and you close your eyes and you fold your arms and you fall backwards, and you have to trust them that they will catch you, and you have to trust yourself that you won't just crumple because you're afraid to fall backwards. And you do that until you get really comfortable with that move. You take turns doing that. And then you stand on maybe a box that's 8 inches high, and you do the same thing because you've already learned that you can trust doing it from the ground level. And you keep raising that until you can fall backwards from a stage that's 4 feet above the 4 feet above the deck. And he said, we did that. And each time we developed more trust and more skill and more capacity. And he said, what I've just realized is that this is what Joe, and Joe's this little kid in a great big wheelchair, and Joe doesn't speak. He vibrates, but he doesn't speak. This is what Joe feels like every time he comes through the door of the school. He's at that nervous position where he doesn't know whether he can trust what's going to happen. And we need to be trustworthy for him and with each other. We need to develop that. And the thing that did was it changed the whole environment of what these people understood that they needed to be doing. John started visiting the family in their home and getting to know mom and dad and the kids better. And everybody worked in that direction. That wasn't all they needed to do, but that was really important for them. One form of looking inside the dream is, again, to take what somebody says initially at face value and then sort of draw these clusters of things, sort of doing practice paths. Somebody will eventually say, I want to win the lottery. And we go ahead and write that down. I've learned not to say, well, that's dumb. It's a $17 million to one shot. We write that down, but then we can say, if you won the lottery, what would you be doing? What change would that make in your life? And we've heard people say, I'd be more help to my kids. I'd be doing more meaningful work. I'd be more generous. I'd play more. Well, all of those things are available. Winning the lottery is still 17 million to 1, but you and your supporters, whether they're service supporters or family supporters or neighbor supporters, can help some of these things come to life in incremental kinds of ways. So it's always possible to do that. One person who was in a practice path did many aspects of her sense of direction, her values, her idea of a good life. And we left room in the middle for somebody to sort of plug in. When they're finished, we can say, is there one image that sort of captures all of that? And she said, thought about it, and she said, yeah, there's a tree, there's an arbutus tree on Hornby Island that I visit every year in the fall when the bark is peeling. And she says, I want that tree on my path. And I knew that she knew what the tree looked like and I didn't. So I handed her the magic markers and she drew this tree with no leaves on it, by the way, because it was fall. And she talked about it. She said, I'm peeling myself to find the depth. It's about growth and beauty and peace and happiness. And she captured that vision, that image, which allows her to keep remembering what it is that she really wants to be moving toward. So there's some things that you can do with graphics that are really helpful, and it may be interesting to practice that. I draw stick people, right? I don't draw portraits. I draw little wiggly stick people. So don't worry about being an artist. One man who didn't speak, Faye handed him the magic markers, and he drew what he was hoping for, not only for himself, that he became a Homo sapien artist object, that people saw him as a man and saw him as a real true artist, but what he was hoping for the arts co-op that had invented him or invited him to become an authentic member of the arts co-op. And he said, this is where the art museum was born on 1266. And 18 years later, in 2001, this is what it's going to look like. It'll be bigger. There'll be more people and more art and so on. So all of this in some ways is about a process of being receptive and kind of a deep listening. And this is the Chinese character, the Chinese ideogram for listening that I first saw when I was visiting a self-advocacy meeting in one of the northeastern states. Several people were wearing this image on their shirts. And I said, what is it? It's the Chinese character for listening. Usually when we think about listening, we're thinking about just our ears, maybe, sort of putting our hand to our ear. It's more complex than this. Their understanding is it's about eyes, ears, heart, undivided attention, and a little character inside the thing that represents the king. And I said, what's that about? And they said, when you're listening, you treat the person with the kind of respect and honor what they're saying as you would honor and respect someone who is a king. So we're going to have a chance to practice this form of listening with each other. We're going to have a breakout room. And it's going to be a slightly different kind of breakout room, because we're going to invite you into breakout rooms that have 3 people in them instead of 6 or 7 or 8 people. And we are inviting you for 4 minutes each to talk about your dream, about what you hope for in your own future, not the future that you have for somebody else in mind, but your own future. Because this is an equal opportunity experience for all of us to get some clarity for our own direction. And one of the ground rules in learning and using PATH, which was the form that Jack and Marcia and John O'Brien formed, was you don't get to do a PATH on anybody else until you've had your own done, because you need to get a feeling for what it's like to be that vulnerable, but also what it's like to have that kind of powerful conversation and that kind of change-making conversation. So we're going to ask you to do something very brave, which is one after another to talk for 4 minutes about what you dream about, what you hope for in your own future. You get a chance toward the end of the meeting to do the same exercise, but talking about what you're hoping for in the life of someone that you care about or care for. But right now, focus on your own future. For 4 minutes, you will speak, and your companions will just listen. And if you stop speaking 2 minutes in, they're just going to keep listening for 2 more minutes. And our friend Mary will send a signal at the 4-minute moment when you switch and the next person speaks for 4 minutes, and she'll send a signal at 8 minutes when the third person speaks. But if someone stops speaking, just give them the space and the silence to think about what they really want to say next, because often people are really beginning to think deeply about what they want in their future, and they need to stop for a little bit. And our tendency as helpers is to jump in at that moment with a whole bunch of ideas and suggestions and corrections and things like that. Just give the person a chance to either dwell in silence, which is legitimate, or to think about and finally express the next thing that they're thinking about. So 4 minutes. And then you switch roles. Mary will signal you, and one of the other people you're with will talk about the dream they have for their own future, and you will just listen. And that switch will happen one more time. And when the three of you have had a chance to speak, spend the last 4 minutes talking with each other about what it felt like to be the speaker and to be a listener. And our experience in real life and in these kinds of exercises is that the speaker will tell you what that was like for them. And it's often a very powerful combination of anxiousness and power. But listeners will say, I really felt moved and empathetic with the person. And somebody else will say, I felt like I really wanted to help. And I actually, in our little conversation, offered to help folks move on with this. And the reason that's important is because time after time in these kinds of direction setting conversations, people in the larger circle will say, I get that and I love it, and here's how I can help. We'll talk a little bit more about that after the breakout. So Mary, I think you're going to send us all into breakout rooms in threes. There are going to be some breakout rooms that are made up of people who've identified as wanting to be in a Spanish-speaking room. And if in the event that there's one person in the room who is has either checked out of the meeting, but their name is still in the room, and you have to invite one after another person to speak. If someone's not speaking, just extend the time that you have talking about what it felt like to be the speaker and the listener. So Mary's going to send us into breakout rooms. Mary, I would like to actually be in one of the breakout rooms. I don't know if you have the ability to make that switch at the time, but I really wouldn't mind doing that. And we'll
I have
see you
you
back.
in one right now.
Okay, great. And we will see you in 16 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good break. I just had a great cup of coffee and we're ready to roll. By the way, we're going to, when we do the second breakout room, because now we have a sense of the rhythm of this conversation, we can shorten it a bit. So we're going to shorten it to 2-minute segments and make sure that we end up at exactly the right time and turn the meeting back over to Mark at 8 minutes to the top of the hour. I want to talk just a little bit about the power and the value and the importance of bringing other people into the picture. We were helping someone who became quite a good friend develop his own sense of direction. He in the institution had very difficult time there, and then sort of got bounced from one group home to one facility to one living arrangement after another. And it hurt him every time he got moved. He became homeless, for one thing, but the other thing is that it really injured his sense of what was possible in life. So when we gathered, and he gathered 15 people to help him do his path, he said, I want my own house and my own land. And because I want stability in my living arrangement, but I also want to welcome my helpers rather than have to leave when my helpers decide that they're finished doing that. And I want a garden. I want to find love. I want to be married. I want to be safe. I want to have a circle of friends. And then he invited the other people in the room to offer their ideas and their hopes for him, their wishes for him, and their reflections on his gift and his role and his future life. But we also said, if somebody says something that you don't want on your path, please let us know about that before we start writing it down, so that so that we get that signal, because this is your plan. And this very broad, because there were 15 people in the room, service people and a couple, one or two extended family people, but also people from his current life and from the deaf community came, and they added all of these elements. And each time when somebody made a proposition, made a suggestion, we got an indication from him that yes, this would be wonderful to have on his path. And actually at one point, if you look in the sort of 10 o'clock position from the circle, he said, no, I don't want that on my path. I want to go forward. I don't want to go back. So when it came time to think together about not only what the broad direction, but what could be accomplished in a couple of years. And we asked people to imagine that they were a couple of years down the road and to talk about what they not only thought could be accomplished, but what they felt they will accomplish in the next couple of years. He was the first to speak. And it's always important to do that, to give the person the chance to be the first to speak in any element of this. And he said, I bought the house. And we said, great. How did that happen? And he signed, I can't remember. And we said, can we ask the other people if they can remember? And he said, yes. And one after another of the people in the circle talked about the role that they played in him getting the house. Somebody leveraged a trust fund as a down payment. Somebody was good friends with the loans manager at the credit union and said, not only did we vouch for him, but we stood with him when he applied for the mortgage. Somebody from the mental health system said, I made it possible for him to use gain funding, which is a British Columbia thing, to pay the mortgage. Somebody else said, I baked pie. Somebody else said, I held a painting bee, and so on. And one element after another. I have support from hearing people who can sign and people who are deaf and interpreters, and a micro board that allows me to hire my own helpers. One after another, people pitched in to talk about not only how that would happen, but how they would help that to happen. And this goes back to Margaret Wheatley saying people will truly support what they help to create, and they did. So there's power in gathering the circle, more ideas and opportunities, more people who can pitch in, and we can invite others to share their dreams, or he can invite others to share their dreams and their hopes for him. But the person gets to say what he or she wants on her statement of direction. I like that, or thanks, I hear you, but I don't want to go in that direction. And circle members might say about some things, yeah, we get that and we can help with that, and here's how. Or we hear you and we're going to keep it in view, but we can't figure out how to help with that right now. Keep thinking about it. And only occasionally circle members might feel compelled to say, sorry, but we can't or even won't help you do that, and here's why. We had 3 guys in a path workshop one time who said, could we use this to plan a bank robbery? And I thought, and said, yeah, strictly speaking, you could, but we won't help you do that. And here's why. And in Michael Small's terms, we need to keep in mind that what's important for the person might include some agreements that we need to make about major safeties in the work that we're doing together. So we're not ever not paying attention to that. So just a real quick recap of the planning pattern: listen and capture the vision, and think about progress that you might be able to make in a year or so, a significant amount of time. Capture what's going on now. Ask, who else do we need to bring into the picture? Who else do we need to enroll? And what do we need to do to get stronger? and identify sometimes one bold step that makes everything else fall together, and get clear about what we can accomplish in the next 30 days, because that brings us together again in 30 days and people can talk about how they have helped. And then ask each person to declare their own first step. And when we're doing that, it can help to help somebody get down to brass tacks. If somebody says something very broad or very abstract, like, in order to do this, I have to achieve inner peace, which is probably true, we can say, great, what's your first step in achieving inner peace? By the way, that's actually happened. The man said, I need to make peace with my son. And we said, great, what's your first step in making peace with your son? And he said, I'll call Bill tonight. And he did. And it made this huge difference in his life. When Nick came out of the institution, he wanted to work in foods. Joanne, his direct support worker, had her attention drawn to him watching something about Winnipeg Harvest, which was a food bank of food banks. And Nick said, I want to help there. And they talked to Dave Northcott, and Joanne said, Dave, Nick has a question, and here's how you read the question, because he was using a bliss board. And he became part of this wonderful group of Harvest companions. This is a little bunch of them. This was a huge bunch of them who had a celebration on the 10th anniversary. And if you look at these people and look at these people and think about Joan Loomis's idea of open the door and see all the people, all of these people have connections. All of these people have opportunities that they can offer. Nick was also talking to us at one point about the Holocaust and wanted to know why that happened. And I gave him my answer, but I had not learned Joanne's lesson. The next person into the meeting, Nick was on our board of directors, next person in the meeting was Harry Haid, who's connected with the Chabad Lubavitch Jewish Learning Center and the people who were putting the Human Rights Museum together in Manitoba. And if I had known then what we know now, it would have been so easy to have a conversation with Harry and said, Harry, can you introduce Nick to these people and to the passion he has about that question? So we're going to have one quick breakout room. This will be a lightning breakout room. And instead of 4-minute segments, it'll be 2-minute segments. But you know how to do it now. Talk for 2 minutes about what you dream about, what you hope for in the future of someone whom you care for, a son or a daughter, a brother or a sister, maybe your mom or your dad, someone for whom you are the service coordinator, and your companions will just listen. And then you'll switch roles. Mary will ask you to switch roles. And one of the other people you're with will talk about the dream they have about the future for someone they care, and you will just listen. And that'll happen one more time. And then you'll have a chance to spend the last 2 minutes talking about what it felt like to be the speaker and the listener. So Mary, if you will pitch us into new rooms of 3 people, we will see everybody back in 8 minutes flat. Welcome back, everybody. This week, homework is to practice this conversation and start this conversation with the person or someone about whom you are caring, somebody you're caring about, whether that's a son or a daughter or your dad or somebody that you support in services. It doesn't have to be a formal, giant person-centered planning meeting. It can just be a conversation about, you remember Scott's conversation with Alan, what would you love to be doing? Nick's conversation about something that he is worried about or something that he cares about, and maybe where that care can come to life. And Michael's conversation about getting his own home and who we might need to enroll. So start that conversation with one person about whom you're caring, and we will see you next week. And Mark, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. Delightful to have everybody and come together on all the things that we're trying to work on and hear from. And as we kind of wind ourselves up today, I'm going to go through the next steps that we'll be doing. First of all, David, I want to thank you for just an extraordinary session. We have 2 more sessions with David. We look forward to having that in addition to David's helping all the way through. And, really focusing on what it takes to strengthen, build, connect your circle support. So just a couple other things I've covered before, but I want to remind you, we have available for you the advanced topics, and it's going to drop into the chat box, the link for that. And these are 10 that we did earlier in the year, and these are all really extraordinary. They're all people that you'll be hearing from. So Kathy Brill is the next person coming up in 2 weeks and on children and young adults, because we have known people say, how does this relate to families that have children, where we're just working with the families for the service coordinators particularly. Just a second. Excuse my cough. Per Barnett, who's a national, actually an international expert, works in other countries on older adults and person-centered planning. Michael Kendrick, who's done an extraordinary job on what is being started actually in Nebraska, an effort to have supported decision-making be instigated, be available, be connected. The ARC is doing a number of pieces and had several workshops on that. There's a working group going on. And so here's from Michael Kendrick, who is really a national expert and working in a number, actually works in many countries, but particularly states on the supported decision-making. Ruthie Marie Beckwith on discovering employment to many people, and then finally a session for people with disabilities themselves on helping people lead their own meetings. So those are some that you can link, and it tells a whole description about who they are and what they're doing. I want to invite people to be champions, which is really just wanting to promote person-centered planning in Nebraska. And if you want to do that, just enter an email in the chat box. We will be having another person-centered planning, champions meeting. We've been having them monthly. We had them off for the summer, and we'll be having another one in a few weeks to ask you to join us. The success stories, this is from Emma. Teresa has actually been in our training with us this session. And this is her daughter's story. And we want to collect Mary, who's with us as our co-host, has been collecting the stories. If you would just email me or Mary that you have somebody who might be interested in sharing their story. You don't have to write anything. You don't have to do anything. Mary is an excellent writer in collecting stories. This is going to go up on the DHS website, and it's a way of promoting person-centered planning and sharing the stories with people and trying to do that. So we'll be doing that. There are 10 webinars from the past. They're all on the DHS website that for anyone yourself or anybody that you're working with, they are all extraordinary. These are all people who've worked in Nebraska previously. They're creators. You see David Wetherow up there, of course, but they're creators of person-centered planning. They wrote the books and the manuals, and we just recommend them to you. The Facebook page is just a way of connecting and sharing information. So we just appreciate it if you watch that. Some people want to see the links that Ann's put in or can't copy them all. There's, if you click on the participants, the chat box, there's 3 little dots, and you could save that to your own computer. It'll save under folder Zoom chat box, and you'll have all of these and the entire thing. And with that, we want to really hope that you'll do the SurveyMonkey link. We're just about to file our quarterly report with the DD Council, and are really interested in what it is that you think, what you feel. Also, this is all federally funded, and the DD Council has to submit its annual plan, and they helps them get for the federal government to see what their money is being spent on the benefit. And there's a link there in the chat box for you. So that you can just see that. We also have recordings from last week. I sent those to you already. They're available to you. You can share with other people and help other people say. So with all of that, we want to express our appreciation for you coming and being with us. we want to encourage you and invite you, not only yourself, but come bring somebody else with you next week.
Can I say something, Mark?
Yes, Janet.
I want to thank my sister for coming, and I know she said she wouldn't speak in a room, but I know she would have. But she really cares about people with disabilities. She has a passion just like me. She came and supported me at People First groups, and I really appreciate for what she did in my life. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you, Janet. Appreciate that. So with that, we're going to wind ourselves up, and I want to say on behalf of all of us, we want to thank David Wetherow for his training. We want to thank both Mary Angus, who's been with us, Janet, for your comments, Jennifer, who's with us and be part of our training in the future as we go down the road and be doing a little bit of that some more, and Formeller, for being part of the training and being part of us. And with that, we'll all bid you good afternoon, and hope to see you next week. We'll send you the recording and update, and please do your kind of follow up. And we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye, everybody.